Wow, wow, wow. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Indigenous Congress 2022. We are so fortunate, excited, and certainly we are honored to be having, the Honorable Senator Mary Jane McCallum with us, second year in a row. We feel blessed. For those of you who perhaps this is the first time you're seeing the senator, she is from a First Nations woman of Cree heritage and a renowned advocate for social justice who, over the course of her distinguished career, had provided dental care to First Nation communities across Manitoba, received a dental nursing diploma at Waskasna Institute of Applied Arts and Science in 1977, and a dental therapy diploma at the School of Dental Therapy in 1979, before earning a doctor of dental medicine from the University of Manitoba in 1990. From 1979 to 97, has been involved in a lot of dental activities. And then from 1992 to 96, worked in her home community of Brochette, where she managed many community health programs. The Dr. Senator Mary Jane McCallum worked as an independent contractor for the first Federal First Nations and Inuit Health branch, providing services in northern Manitoba before returning to the University of Manitoba in April 22. I mean, I can go on and on about her accomplishments and about her service, not just to the Indigenous people, but to the people of Canada and indeed people around the world. She spoke last year. For those who would have been here last year, you can go on the chat right now and say I was, so we know how many of you were here last year listening to the senators. Powerful, powerful, moving speech. We have her here again to talk to us about the theme for this year's Indigenous Congress 2022, which is from generational trauma to generational wealth. Dr. Senator Honorable Mary Jane McCallum, welcome to the Canadian Congress.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'm very honored that you've asked me to come back to speak to the people that are attending the conference and elsewhere, and that I hope to challenge myself and others to see Indigenous people in a different light, and I had asked a question. I was talking to a group on Saturday and I said, do you think Indigenous people are important to Canada? Because some people don't, it's such a fundamental question, like, why do we keep getting left behind?
Wow.
Is it because we don't matter to Canadians? Is it because you don't see how important Indigenous, and the Black, other people of color, how important they are in bringing their cultures, their history, their teachings, their wisdom, and using that background of culture to start having a different conversation, right? And that's where I'd like to go today, is the power of Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC community, and because we share a lot together. And I do read a lot of books on, I buy a lot of books on that are authored by Black people. There was one I'm reading, it says, what doesn't kill you makes you Blacker. It's a really such a good book, because it just gives you strength. That you have that our ancestors behind us. And to begin with, I wanted to acknowledge our ancestors that historically, they're in the spirit world, but historically, they were very persistent, they were tenacious, they were determined that we would not remain in the position that the state or the colonizers wanted us to be in a colonized position, and that we now have an obligation as living ancestors to carry on that work for the generations yet to come. And that's how we make progress. And as we're making that progress, we get to learn. I get to learn about what happened to me. Like, why did they remove me from my family to put me in an institution and reshape my identity? It wasn't mine, and it was the identity of the nuns and priests that kept us. And now I'm saying no. That's not me, and I need to become the the person that the Creator had envisioned for me. And I said to this group yesterday, I said, when I go into the spirit world, I said, the Creator isn't going to say, why weren't you like me? He's going to say, why weren't you the Mary Jane that you were capable of being? Because he gives us so many gifts, the Creator, he or she. And that's where I'm coming from today, is how, what are we looking at? How are we bridging the gap between different institutions, between different contexts, and how do we work to build a relationship with the rest of Canada? And how will that relationship look like? And, it's not going to happen, like you said, fast. And we need to set a tone, right?
Yes.
A tone of compassion, a tone of transformation. And but we still need to challenge society. And we still need the courage to be able to bring out issues that are very difficult to bring out, and still do it, because if we don't, the foundation won't be as strong as it should be for this new relationship. But I have hope. I have a lot of hope. And you know what? You're one of them. When I look at you and the work you do, all of you, you're already bridging the gap, right? You do it with truth, and we're building trust, and we'll go from there.
Wow. Something that I keep emphasizing, that I'm personally learning from every conversation I have with Indigenous leaders like you, is the ability to weave grace and compassion, things that have been taken out of leadership. I don't know any leadership school that teaches compassion and grace and love, but yet I've come to term it Indigenous leadership. That's what I call it. It's a leadership of forgiveness, of hope. Thanks for your elaborate opening, Senator. You asked a question right up the front and try to unpack it. If you don't mind, let's go back to it. Why do we keep getting left behind? Why do, they come to the table to share the budget, they forget about Indigenous people. They are developing the communities, they forget about Indigenous people. They are building roads, they forget about Indigenous people. They are writing curriculum for education, they forget about Indigenous people. Yet 40% or more than 40% of inmates, I believe, in some of these provinces that have a huge number of Indigenous people, are Indigenous people in prison. So when it comes to taking people onto welfare, through the welfare system, they put the indigenous people. When it comes to, denying people justice and healthcare, they talk the indigenous people. So why do indigenous people, why do you think they keep getting left behind? Taking you back to the question you asked.
I believe that assimilation is still happening, that people that people are still trying to assimilate others, and it includes every single person, because all of us can colonize people, and we can also be the colonized, and we need to find that happy balance, and meet in the middle, so we're not colonizing people, but we're not also being colonized. And when you look at the ability of, historically, the ability of society to ignore and marginalize indigenous people has been accepted, that it's okay to do that. And it still continues to happen, because it takes a long time for people to realize that they are even practicing that concept of marginalizing people. And they're still believing that we aren't capable of coming up with our own solutions. But, we're showing more and more that we are. And assimilation is something that will never, ever work, because at one point in my life, I started to assimilate people, because I'd been in residential school for 11 years, and people are telling you you're subordinate, you're a savage, and they taught us learned helplessness. And that's one of the one of the signs of oppression is learned helplessness, where you feel you can't do anything unless someone tells you. And at one point in my career as a dentist, I was working on my reserve with my own people, and I was using language like, we're going to have to teach them how to do this. Why do they keep staying there? Why do they keep doing this? I had already almost separated them from me. And then I was blaming them, of course. That's where the blame comes. And then at a certain point in my life, I was, as a dentist, we're taught to sever the mouth from the rest of the body, and the rest of the body into different organs. Nothing was interconnected. And that, this is how you do dentistry, and it's very clinical, very cold, very fast. No attention to the patients. And I was working on this little girl, and she looked at me so frightened. I thought, what am I doing? just so I can accomplish what my goal was. I wasn't even thinking of the patients. And I knew that I was doing wrong, and it really bothered me. And I started to change the way I did things, and to be more inclusive, because if you are assimilating people, it sounds inclusive, but it actually isn't. Yeah, because you're separating them still, right?
Yes.
You're saying you are subordinate and you need to be like me. And I mean, I'm not even, I'm subordinate with other people, but I thought that would raise me, in people's eyes. And that's how shallow, that's how, that I was starting to accept what the oppressive nuns and priests were telling me and starting to now preach that same, right? And then I started looking at the people and being more inclusive in our culture. We have ceremony, and I started looking at working with people as a ceremony, that when they came in my clinic, that was sacred space. So even when you go into a meeting place, where you have people, it doesn't matter the amount, that is sacred space, because people trust you. They're there to get truth. They're there to absorb energy. So that is sacred space, and we need to treat it like that, by respecting people, by having ground rules about how we're going to operate in here. And one of my ground rules was that if I had any negative energy, I would not go into the clinic, because that will be absorbed by the patient. And then at the end, you thank the patient for coming, because that is part of the ceremony, that, and another part of ceremony is your intention. What is your intention? Like, what is our intention sitting here together right now? And it's to have a conversation and go deeper into the lives of Indigenous people, and understand, because all of us are here on this earth to grow from our experiences. So, when you said, where do you learn compassion? You learn it. It's not something you learn in a textbook. You learn it in the field, right?
Yes.
And all of us have those gifts in us. And it's only when we, like, when it's the time to do it, it comes to you. And I remember when I learned compassion and really understood it, even though I had practiced it, but to put a word to it was such a significant moment for me. And you look at, when you've beaten the people down with the healthcare system, because that's where I've worked, or with the housing system, people start to accept that subordinate role, and they have lost their voice. The voice is very important, to not be left behind. But if that voice has been taken from you from childhood, where you don't speak unless you're spoken to, and you say, yes, sister, no, sister, you cannot defend anything that you do. To start raising that voice becomes very difficult. And it, I think, when you talk about wealth, to me, voice is wealth. Because that's where we need to start looking at, how do we get the youth to start talking about themselves. The other wealth is critical thinking, because that was removed from us. And because we didn't, how you get critical thinking, it, with curiosity, with creativity, with boldness, because children are bold, and if that's a positive term.
Yes.
And that's how they look at stuff and start thinking and critiquing, especially when we lived out on the land. We had to know the land. And when we went into the school, and I call that building our box. So you're put in this box, and the number one, I realized in the last 2 months, and I've been speaking about this, the number one issue, or the number one source of oppression is the notion of sin. It's the foundation, it is the core of oppression. Because we went in, I was like 5, 6, and I'm told you're a sinner. And I took it, and I said, okay, I'm going to be the best sinner. And I really did say that.
Wow.
And I would drum up what sins I had made. So when people do live like that, then they never ever feel that they're worth anything. And when we look at the people on the street, how that they have accepted what society has given them, that's, you can see that, and I'll tell people, don't judge them, just think, what did they go through to arrive at that situation? Because they didn't arrive there alone. Like, we have left them the furthest behind. They don't want to come with us because they don't like society and how it's treated them. So they're
Yes.
there. And so when we look at the boys and the critical thinking, when I talked about the box, we get in the box, and the first block to go up as we're building the walls is the notion of sin. I'm a sinner. And that will never go away. I still feel I will go to hell today, like if I die, and I think, what have I done? But that was drilled into me. So you have the notion of sin, and in the meantime, they take away your creativity and take it out of the box. They take your
Critical thinking.
curiosity,
Yeah.
and they take it away from you. And in its place, the next block is blind obedience. And that they take away your ability to make choices, to give voice. They want silence. And they're chucking this and they're building that little identity, right? So, and why I bring this up is sometimes we allow ourselves to be left behind because that's been the norm. And how do we then challenge ourselves to say, I'm not going to be left behind. I have to take care of my children. And part of my saving grace, and this is wealth again, is the teachings of the elders that I had when I was before 5 years old. And what my culture taught me about sharing, joy, laughter, nurturing, all the positive stuff. And, like, we lived like that, all that good stuff went, and then, it was like, okay, here's the negative, and that's what you grow up with. And so and I think that's the difficulty, is because as we leave, we keep leaving people behind. So everybody is at different levels of being left behind. It's not like this is the pan-Canadian model of bringing everybody out of this. That's not going to happen. And then people say, well, you didn't get left behind. Look at where you are to go from here to become a dentist and now a senator. Like, if you could do it, everybody can. But that isn't the reality. We were all affected in different ways. And we were also, what we brought with us, like I said, with the teachings of the elders.
Right.
I carried that with me. And that was my saving grace, that I remembered those teachings, and I'm going back to them now. And for some of the children, there's different types of strengths in different people. And I could withstand a lot of the punishing that I got, people strapping me or punishing me in different ways because I wasn't blind, I wasn't obedient. And, but I did chastise myself about that and say, why am I so disobedient? Why can't I listen? But that was sin, but it actually was a child being a child, right?
Yes.
And So when we look at people, and that's why I speak a lot, because when I go and speak at our residential school gatherings, people will line up and a lot of them say, I feel the same, I cannot voice it because they're too scared. It's almost like the God will punish them for speaking against the church, because it's the church that did this to us, right?
Yes.
So they'll say, I feel like that, and it is their way of releasing when I speak, and there's I was at U of W yesterday speaking, and someone came and said, my mom never spoke about residential school. And, and at that time, there was really, people weren't listening. And so we look at all the ways we could be left behind. And it's a huge topic.
Wow.
Yeah. And I struggle with being left behind as well. The other thing that comes into that is because you feel you don't belong. So when you're assimilated, what you're trying to do is fit into the main group, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you never really belong.
Belong.
You only belong to yourself, right? And when, there was one of the legislation came up, and it's the assisted dying. And I was very concerned about it because of the high rates of suicide for Indigenous youth.
Yes.
And I spoke against it, and I spoke every day. I had to do my speeches because it was ongoing. And I knew that a lot of times I was standing alone or with a very few people. And, and one of the senators said to me, you must feel raw, because, in the middle of adversity, you would like someone to stand beside you.
Yes.
And yet, that is when we need to be the strongest. And Brené Brown has some really good books. And
Yes.
she calls that Braving the Wilderness. I had spoken about her. And she says, stand firm and stand tall and dig. You know that what you're doing is right.
Right.
And when the vote came and it passed, I had done my best. That is all I could do. And I have to be happy with that too. That I've done the best I could. It went through, and then I have to leave it. So if I'm not careful with how I handle that, I'm going to leave myself behind. Right? You're going to not be true to yourself. So you have to, to keep reading and to keep praying and to keep talking with elders and to keep talking with other people, to wind your way, because there's more difficult things coming, and that you need to be there for yourself, and the people that you represent, which for me is different groups of people, but it's mostly Indigenous people. Yeah. And that I bring their concerns to the Senate floor. And at one time I had made an amendment, and one senator said, could you could you not do the amendment? I can't remember the term right now. And I said, no, this is not mine. These are for Indigenous people. It's going to stay, and we're voting on it. And so there's always those moments where, I could leave myself behind, and I have to be careful about it. And if I do, that's okay, because I'm only human. When there's moments, yeah. So, there's a lot of, but the belonging and fitting in, I really had to come to terms with it and just say, I belong to myself, and I'm okay where I am.